The summer sun beat down on the highway that July afternoon. The truck driver adjusted his mirror and wiped sweat from his brow as he navigated the commercial semi-truck down US 35 in Ohio. The truck's engine hummed steadily as he checked his delivery schedule, thinking about how many more hours he had on the road before he could rest. He didn't notice anything wrong with his truck. No warning lights flashed on his dashboard. The tires felt fine. But behind him, red and blue lights suddenly flashed in his rearview mirror. A police vehicle was signaling for him to pull over. The young black man felt his heart rate quicken. He'd heard stories from other drivers about traffic stops gone wrong. He'd seen the news reports and viral videos. Still, he knew the rules of the road. When an officer signals, you pull over. He eased the massive semi toward the shoulder, carefully putting on his turn signal and slowing down. As the truck came to a stop, he looked in his side mirrors. Something didn't feel right. There weren't just one or two officers approaching. Several police cars had now gathered behind him, and officers were emerging with their hands hovering near their holsters. Why so many officers for what should be a routine traffic stop? The truck driver's mind raced. He hadn't been speeding. His paperwork was in order. The truck's maintenance was up to date. Why were they pulling him over with such force, and why were their hands so close to their weapons? In that moment, a cold fear washed over him. The stories from friends, family, and fellow drivers echoed in his head, warnings about encounters between police and unarmed black men. Before the officers could reach his door, he made a split-second decision that would change everything. He put the truck back in gear and pulled away. "I can't do this," he whispered to himself. "Something's not right." He drove on, his hands trembling slightly on the wheel. In his mirror, he saw the police cars light up again and begin to follow. This was now becoming a pursuit. His thoughts tumbled over each other as the gravity of his decision sank in. Running from police would only make things worse. But staying there, surrounded by officers with their hands near their weapons, had felt too dangerous. The radio in his truck crackled with static. The CB channel was quiet today. No fellow truckers to call out to for help or advice. He was alone on this stretch of highway with a growing number of police vehicles behind him. He reached for his cell phone with a shaking hand and dialed 911. The dispatcher's voice came through clear and professional. "What's your emergency?" "I'm being followed by police," the truck driver said, his voice tight with stress. "I tried to pull over, but they all had their guns drawn. I don't know why they're trying to kill me." The dispatcher's tone remained level. "Sir, you need to pull over. You're going to get yourself in more trouble than you're already in." "I don't understand what I did wrong," he replied, glancing nervously at his mirrors. The parade of police vehicles had grown. "They're chasing me with guns out. I don't feel safe stopping." As he spoke, the truck rolled on. Fields and farmhouses passed by outside the windows. Other cars pulled to the side as the impromptu procession moved down the highway. Some drivers stared. Others quickly looked away, not wanting to get involved. "Sir," the dispatcher continued, "I can assure you they're not trying to kill you, but you need to comply with their instructions and pull over." "Yes, they are," he insisted, the fear evident in his voice. "I parked the truck and I was about to comply with them, but they all had their guns drawn for whatever reason. I do not feel safe with stopping." His mind flashed back to stories he'd heard growing up, warnings from his father about how to behave during traffic stops, conversations with friends about encounters gone wrong, news stories about traffic stops that ended in tragedy. He'd always believed that if he followed the rules, kept his paperwork in order, and was respectful, everything would be fine. But seeing those officers approach with hands near weapons had triggered a primal fear. The dispatcher continued to try to calm him, explaining that running would only escalate the situation. Deep down, he knew this was true, but the fear had taken hold, clouding his judgment. Mile markers passed. His fuel gauge showed he'd need to stop eventually regardless. And what was his plan here? He couldn't outrun police forever in a commercial semi. There was no good ending to a police chase. After driving for several more minutes, with the gravity of the situation becoming clearer, he made another decision. This time he would stop. This time he would face whatever happened. But he would be careful. Very careful. He spotted a stretch of road ahead with a wide shoulder. Enough space for his truck and all the police vehicles. Enough space that would keep them away from civilian traffic. He signaled, eased off the gas, and guided the massive vehicle to a stop. His hands were sweating now as he put the truck in park and turned off the engine. The quiet was sudden and jarring after the constant rumble of the road. Through his mirrors, he could see police vehicles positioning themselves behind him. Officers were emerging, some taking cover behind their car doors. The young man took several deep breaths, trying to calm his racing heart. The 911 dispatcher was still on the line. "I'm stopping now," he told them. "Please tell them I'm not dangerous." "I'm just scared." "Just follow their instructions carefully," the dispatcher advised. "Keep your hands visible at all times." He set down the phone. Through his windows he could hear officers shouting commands, though the thick cab of the semi muffled their words. He knew what he needed to do. Slowly, deliberately, he opened his door. The shouts from outside became clearer. "Exit the vehicle." "Hands where we can see them." He complied, stepping down from the high cab of the truck with deliberate movements. The summer heat hit him immediately outside the air-conditioned cab. The asphalt radiated warmth. Traffic had stopped in both directions. In the distance, he could see civilian drivers watching the scene unfold, some holding up phones to record. The young man raised his hands high above his head. He was shirtless in the summer heat, wearing only shorts and shoes. There was nowhere to hide a weapon, nothing that could be mistaken for a threat. His skin glistened with sweat in the July sun as he stood there, hands raised. "I'm unarmed," he called out clearly. "I'm not resisting." The scene had taken on an unreal quality. Here he was, standing on the side of a highway in broad daylight, surrounded by police officers, some with weapons drawn, for what should have been a routine traffic stop, all because of a mud flap, a missing mud flap on his truck that he hadn't even noticed. He remained still, hands in the air. Different voices called out different commands, some telling him to walk backward, others telling him to get on the ground. The confusion of overlapping instructions added to his fear. Whose commands should he follow? What move might be misinterpreted as resistance? "Please," he said clearly, "just tell me what you want me to do." From where he stood, he could see different uniforms. State highway patrol officers in their distinctive hats, local police in darker uniforms. They weren't all from the same department, which seemed to be causing confusion in the chain of command. One of the state troopers had moved to a position where the truck driver could see him clearly. The trooper's body language was different from the others, less tense, more controlled. The trooper seemed to be trying to de-escalate the situation, speaking in a calmer voice to his colleagues. The young man focused on keeping his breathing steady. The highway was silent except for the voices of the officers and the distant sound of a helicopter, somewhere overhead. Cars had stopped in both directions, creating an audience for whatever would happen next. In that moment, standing there with his hands raised under the summer sun, surrounded by officers from multiple agencies, the truck driver felt a strange calm settle over him. He had done what they asked. He had stopped. He was showing clearly that he was unarmed and not resisting. Surely now the situation would de-escalate. Surely now they would simply handcuff him, read him his rights, and sort everything out at the station. He closed his eyes briefly, feeling the sun on his face and the sweat trickling down his back. When he opened them again, he saw something that made his blood run cold. One of the Circleville police officers had emerged from behind his vehicle with a police dog straining at its leash. The state trooper saw it too. Even from a distance, the truck driver could hear his words clearly in the still summer air. "Do not release the dog with his hands up," the trooper called out. "Do not release the dog!" The young man stood perfectly still, hands raised high above his head, hoping that the officer with the dog would listen to his colleague, hoping that this situation, which had already spiraled far beyond what anyone could have expected from a missing mud flap, wouldn't escalate further. But even as these thoughts passed through his mind, he saw the canine officer's hands move on the leash. The dog lunged forward, released from restraint, and began running toward where he stood exposed and vulnerable on the highway. In that terrible moment, time seemed to slow down. The young truck driver, who had only wanted to feel safe during what should have been a routine traffic stop, realized with sickening clarity that despite his compliance, despite his raised hand showing he was no threat, despite the state trooper's warnings, things were about to get much worse. The dog was coming, and no one was stopping it. Time slowed to a crawl as the young truck driver watched the police dog charge toward him. His hands remained frozen in the air, a position of surrender that should have protected him. The hot asphalt burned through the soles of his shoes. Sweat trickled down his bare chest in the summer heat. His heart pounded so hard he could feel it in his throat. "Stop the dog!" the state trooper yelled again, his voice cutting through the tense silence on the highway. "He's complying. Hands are up." But the canine officer made no move to recall the animal. The dog's powerful legs ate up the distance between them in seconds. Its training focused on a single purpose: to take down its target. The truck driver had nowhere to run. Police vehicles surrounded him on all sides. Officers watched from behind their car doors, some with hands on their weapons. Running would only make things worse, might even get him shot. But standing still meant facing the attacking dog. He chose to stand his ground. "Please," he called out, his voice cracking with fear. "I'm not resisting." The dog hit him like a furry missile, leaping toward his midsection. Sharp teeth sank into the flesh of his arm as he instinctively tried to protect himself. The pain was immediate and intense, unlike anything he'd felt before. The force of the impact knocked him backwards, and he fell hard onto the pavement, the dog still attached to his arm, growling and shaking its head, tearing at his flesh. He screamed. Anyone would have. "Get the dog off of him!" The same state trooper shouted, moving forward now. "Get the dog off!" The truck driver tried not to fight back against the animal. Fighting would only make it bite harder, he'd heard that somewhere. But instinct made it nearly impossible to lie still while teeth tore into his arm. He could feel warm blood running down his skin, soaking into the hot pavement beneath him. "Please," he gasped between screams. "Get the dog off me, please!" The K-9 officer finally approached, but not with any apparent urgency. To the young man on the ground, each second felt like an eternity as the dog continued its attack, its jaw locked onto his arm with crushing pressure. Onlookers from stopped traffic watched in horror, some recorded with their phones, unable to look away from the scene unfolding before them, a man being attacked by a police dog while clearly offering no resistance. After what seemed like forever but was probably 30 seconds, the K-9 officer gave a command and the dog finally released its grip. The truck driver lay on his back, breathing heavily, his arm bleeding and mangled. No one moved to help him immediately. He stayed perfectly still, afraid that any movement might prompt another attack. Can I put my hands down now?" he asked, his voice shaking. His arms had remained raised even during the attack, a testament to how desperately he had wanted to show compliance. "Keep them where we can see them," an officer ordered. Slowly, officers approached. The state trooper who had tried to prevent the dog attack reached him first, concern evident in his eyes. "We're going to get you medical attention," the trooper said, kneeling beside him. "Just stay still." Only then did the other officers move in, handcuffing him despite his obvious injuries. The cold metal of the cuffs bit into his wrists, adding insult to the throbbing pain in his arm. The dog remained nearby, still alert, still watching him as if he were a threat. "I need a medic here," the trooper called out, looking at the bleeding wounds. "Right now." The truck driver's vision blurred at the edges. The combination of pain, fear, and the intense heat was making him lightheaded. He tried to focus on his breathing, in through the nose, out through the mouth, anything to stay conscious. "Why?" he managed to ask through clenched teeth. "Why did you let the dog go?" "I was standing still." No one answered his question directly. Officers moved around him, securing the scene, talking into their radios. The K-9 officer stood a few feet away, the dog now sitting calmly at his side as if nothing had happened. An emergency medical technician finally arrived, kneeling beside the young man to examine his wounds. The bite marks were deep, revealing torn flesh that would likely need stitches and possibly surgery to repair properly. "These are serious," the EMT said quietly. "We need to get him to a hospital." As they prepared to move him, the truck driver caught fragments of conversation between the officers. The state trooper was clearly upset, speaking in hushed but intense tones with the K-9 officer. "He was complying," the trooper said. "Completely unnecessary," the K-9 officer shrugged. "I thought it was a justified bite." Those words sank into the truck driver's consciousness like stones dropping into a still pond. Justified, the officer thought. Sicking a trained attack dog on an unarmed man with his hands in the air was justified. They loaded him onto a stretcher and into an ambulance. The handcuffs remained on, even as medical personnel worked around them to clean and bandage his wounds enough for transport. The message was clear. He was still considered a criminal, not a victim, despite what had just happened to him. Inside the ambulance, away from the eyes of bystanders and the hot sun, the reality of the situation hit him full force. Tears welled in his eyes, not just from the physical pain, which was substantial, but from something deeper. a sense of profound injustice and helplessness. He had done everything right in those final moments. Stopped his truck, exited when ordered, kept his hands visible, stood perfectly still, made no threatening movements. And still, they had released the dog. The ambulance doors closed and they began the drive to the hospital. Through the small windows he could see the scene growing smaller, his truck still on the side of the road, police vehicles with lights flashing, traffic slowly being allowed to move again. Life continuing as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But something extraordinary had happened. Something that would change his life forever. At the hospital, doctors examined his wounds more thoroughly. The dog's teeth had torn through skin, fat, and muscle, causing damage that would require multiple surgeries to repair. Even with the best care, he would likely have permanent scarring and possibly nerve damage. His arm might never work the same way again. As he lay in the hospital bed, a police officer stationed outside his door as if he might try to escape. The truck driver tried to make sense of what had happened. How had a routine traffic stop, reportedly for nothing more than a missing mud flap, escalated to this point? News of the incident spread quickly. Someone had uploaded video footage of the dog attack to social media, and it was already generating outrage. Local news stations picked up the story. Civil rights attorneys reached out through family members who had been notified of his hospitalization. In his hospital room, a detective came to take his statement. The young man recounted everything exactly as it had happened. The initial stop, his fear when he saw officers with hands near weapons, his decision to drive on, the 911 call, and finally his surrender with hands raised. "I just want to understand why," he said, looking at the detective. "Why did they release the dog when I was clearly surrendering?" The detective wrote something in his notebook but offered no explanation. Hours turned into days. The truck driver remained in the hospital, undergoing the first of what would be several surgeries to repair the damage to his arm. His family came to visit, their faces tight with worry and barely controlled anger. His mother cried when she saw his bandaged arm, imagining how much worse it could have been. "You could have been killed," she whispered, holding his uninjured hand tightly in hers. He knew she was right. In that moment, standing on the highway with his hands up, things could have gone even more terribly wrong. The thought haunted his dreams, turning them to nightmares that woke him sweating and gasping in his hospital bed. News reporters requested interviews, which he declined for now, on the advice of the attorneys who had taken his case. But he watched the coverage on the television in his hospital room. Watched as experts debated police use of force. Watched as the police department issued carefully worded statements about following proper protocols and pending investigations. He listened as some commentators questioned why he hadn't just pulled over in the first place, as if that justified what had happened afterward. As if fear wasn't a legitimate response to seeing multiple officers approach with hands near weapons. As if the punishment for that fear should be a vicious dog attack while surrendering. The body camera footage from multiple officers was eventually released to the public, showing different angles of the same horrifying moment. The K-9 officer releasing the dog despite clear warnings from the state trooper, despite the truck driver's obvious surrender posture. The video didn't lie. It showed exactly what had happened. Public outrage grew. Protests formed outside the police department. The mayor promised a thorough investigation. The police chief spoke about reviewing training procedures. None of it changed what had happened to him. As the days passed and his physical wounds began the long process of healing, the truck driver found himself wondering about the less visible wounds, the trauma, the fear, the loss of trust. Those would take much longer to heal if they ever did. One afternoon, as he sat in his hospital room watching news coverage of his own case, something unexpected happened. The state trooper who had tried to prevent the dog attack came to visit him. The trooper stood awkwardly in the doorway, hat in hand. "I just wanted to see how you're doing," he said, "and to say I'm sorry. What happened out there, it shouldn't have happened." It was the first acknowledgement, the first real apology he had received from anyone in law enforcement. "Thank you," the truck driver said quietly. "I heard you trying to stop it." The trooper nodded, his expression grim. "I want you to know, not all of us." He paused, searching for words. "What that officer did doesn't represent all of us." The words hung in the air between them. An offering of humanity in the midst of an inhuman situation. Neither man knew what would happen next, whether justice would be served, whether systems would change, whether anything good could possibly come from something so unjust. But in that moment, a small bridge of understanding formed. It wasn't enough to erase what had happened, but it was something. A reminder that even in broken systems, individual humans can still choose to do what's right. And perhaps that was the first step toward healing. For him, and for a system that had failed him so completely. The hospital discharged the truck driver after 5 days. His arm was heavily bandaged, and he carried a prescription for strong painkillers that barely took the edge off. The wounds would need time to heal. Months, the doctors said. Physical therapy would follow. There might be permanent nerve damage. Too soon to tell. His mother drove him home, glancing worriedly at him every few minutes as if he might break apart right there in the passenger seat. The radio played quietly in the background until a news segment about his case came on. She quickly changed the station. "You don't need to hear that right now," she said, but he did hear it everywhere. His story had gone national. The body camera footage, released 3 days after the incident, had sparked outrage across the country. The images were undeniable. An unarmed black man standing with his hands up, a police dog attacking him despite a state trooper's repeated warnings not to release the animal. At home, he found himself unable to sleep through the night. When he did sleep, nightmares woke him, dreams of dogs chasing him, of being trapped and unable to escape. Sometimes he'd wake up clutching his injured arm, phantom pain shooting through the healing wounds. His phone rang constantly. Reporters, attorneys, activists, all wanting a piece of his story, all wanting him to relive the worst day of his life. Eventually, he stopped answering calls from numbers he didn't recognize. "You need to talk to someone," his sister told him one evening as she changed his bandages. "A professional, I mean. This isn't just physical." He nodded but said nothing. The weight of what had happened pressed down on him, making it hard to think about the future, hard to make decisions. For now, he was just trying to get through each day. A week after his release from the hospital, his attorney visited the house. They sat at the kitchen table while his mother hovered nearby, pretending to wash dishes that were already clean. "The body camera footage is the key," the attorney said, opening a laptop. "Not just from the K-9 officer, but from the state troopers too. Multiple angles showing exactly what happened." The truck driver stared at the table. "I don't want to watch it." "You don't have to," the attorney assured him. "But I want you to know what it shows, because it supports your case completely." The attorney explained how the footage had been released to the public after mounting pressure, how it clearly showed the K-9 officer, identified as Ryan Speakman of the Circleville Police Department, releasing the dog despite the state trooper's repeated warnings, how it captured the truck driver's screams as the dog attacked, and how long it took before Speakman called the dog off. "The audio is particularly damning," the attorney said. After the incident, Speakman was recorded telling another officer, and I quote, "I think it's a justifiable bite. This shows a concerning lack of judgment and possibly indicates a pattern of excessive force." The truck driver's mother stopped pretending to wash dishes and sat down at the table. "What happens now?" she asked. "The police department has placed Speakman on administrative leave while they conduct an internal review. But given the public outrage and the clear evidence, I expect more serious consequences." The attorney explained that they were preparing a civil rights lawsuit. The case was strong: excessive force against an unarmed, complying individual, captured on multiple cameras, with clear warnings from another law enforcement officer that were ignored. "This isn't just about money," the attorney emphasized. "It's about accountability and systemic change. What happened to you shouldn't happen to anyone else." The truck driver nodded slowly. That was what he wanted most, for something good to come from his pain, for no one else to experience what he had. As the days passed, he began the slow work of healing, both physically and mentally. He started seeing a therapist who specialized in trauma. The first few sessions were hard. Just talking about what happened made his heart race and his palms sweat. But gradually it helped. "You did nothing wrong," the therapist told him during one session. "Your fear was valid. Your reaction was human. What happened to you was not your fault." Those words became a lifeline, something to hold on to when guilt and doubt crept in, when he caught himself wondering if he should have just pulled over immediately, if he could have somehow prevented what happened. 2 weeks after the incident, the truck driver agreed to a single interview with a respected journalist known for covering police accountability issues. They met at his attorney's office, a neutral space where he felt safer than at home. where reporters had taken to driving by slowly, hoping for a glimpse or a statement. "Take your time," the journalist said as they began. "We can stop anytime you need to." Slowly, carefully, he recounted the events of that day. The initial pullover attempt, his fear when he saw officers with hands near weapons, the decision to drive on, the 911 call, his eventual surrender with hands raised, and then, the journalist prompted gently, "And then they let the dog attack me," he said simply. "I was standing still, hands up. I wasn't a threat to anyone." The state trooper was yelling not to release the dog, but the K-9 officer did it anyway. When asked why he thought it happened, the truck driver was thoughtful. "I've asked myself that question every day since it happened," he said. "The only answer that makes sense is that they saw me, a young black man, as inherently dangerous, even when I was clearly surrendering." The interview aired that weekend, putting a human face to the body camera footage that had been circulating. People who had been outraged by the video were now moved by the quiet dignity of the man who had suffered the attack, by his lack of bitterness, by his hope that his experience might lead to meaningful change. Public pressure mounted. Civil rights organizations called for Speakman's termination. Community groups organized protests outside the Circleville Police Department. Local officials promised a thorough review of K-9 policies and training. 3 weeks after the incident, the truck driver's attorney called with news. "They've scheduled a press conference for tomorrow," the attorney said. "The mayor and police chief of Circleville. Our sources indicate they're going to announce Speakman's termination." The truck driver received the news with mixed emotions. On one hand, it felt like vindication, an acknowledgement that what had happened to him was wrong. On the other hand, it didn't erase his scars, didn't give him back the sense of security he'd lost, didn't change the fact that the incident had happened at all. The next day, he watched the press conference on television with his family gathered around him. The mayor spoke first, offering carefully worded statements about the city's commitment to public safety and proper police conduct. Then the police chief stepped forward. After a thorough review of the July 4th incident involving the K-9 apprehension of a suspect, we have determined that Officer Ryan Speakman's actions did not meet the standards and expectations we hold for our police officers. The chief announced, "Officer Speakman has been terminated from the department, effective immediately." The living room erupted in a mix of emotions, his mother crying with relief, his sister hugging him carefully to avoid his injured arm, his younger brother shouting that it wasn't enough, that criminal charges should follow. The truck driver himself sat quietly absorbing the news. It was something, accountability of a sort. But the chief's words stuck with him. K-9 apprehension of a suspect. Not attack on an unarmed man. Not excessive force against a complying individual. The language still framed him as a suspect who needed to be apprehended, not as a victim of police misconduct. Later that day, news broke that the police union had filed a grievance on Speakman's behalf, claiming he was fired without just cause. Without just cause. The truck driver's brother exploded when they heard. "It's all on video." "It's what police unions do," his attorney explained when called for comment. "They fight for their members regardless of the circumstances. But given the evidence in this case, I don't expect the grievance to succeed." That night, as the truck driver changed his bandages, looking at the healing wounds that would likely leave permanent scars on his arm, he thought about scars of another kind, the ones that weren't visible. The trust that had been broken, the sense of safety that had been shattered, the knowledge that compliance didn't guarantee protection. But there was something else growing alongside the trauma, a resolve, a determination that his story would matter, that his pain would not be for nothing. Already, legislators in his state were discussing police reform bills. Community organizations were creating Know Your Rights workshops. Law enforcement agencies across the country were reviewing their K-9 policies. His phone buzzed with a text message. It was from the state trooper who had tried to prevent the dog attack, the one who had visited him in the hospital. "Heard the news about Speakman," the message read. "It's a start. Still more work to do. But I wanted you to know there are those of us inside the system pushing for change too. How are you healing?" The truck driver looked at the message for a long moment before responding. It was a small thing, a text from someone who had shown him basic human decency. But in that moment it felt significant. "Better each day," he typed back. "Thank you for asking. And thank you for trying to stop it." He set the phone down and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet street. In the 3 weeks since the incident, his life had been completely upended. He wasn't sure when or if he'd feel comfortable getting back behind the wheel of a truck. Wasn't sure when he'd stop looking over his shoulder every time he saw flashing lights. Wasn't sure when the nightmares would stop. But he was sure of one thing. His voice mattered now in a way it never had before. People were listening, and maybe, just maybe, that meant something would change. As he stood at the window watching the sun set over his neighborhood, he made a promise to himself. This would not define him. It would change him, yes, how could it not? But he would not let it destroy him. There was work to do, healing to accomplish, justice to seek. And he was just getting started. 2 months after the incident, autumn leaves had begun to fall when the truck driver pulled into the parking lot of his attorney's office. His arm had healed enough that he could drive short distances, though long hauls in an 18-wheeler were still out of the question. The trucking company had placed him on extended medical leave, and his future in the profession remained uncertain. He sat in his car for a moment, gathering his thoughts. Today was important. They would be reviewing the civil rights lawsuit before filing. 6 weeks of preparation had led to this moment. The office was warm and smelled of coffee. His attorney greeted him with a firm handshake, careful of his still healing arm. "How are you feeling today?" the attorney asked, leading him to a conference room where several other legal team members waited. "Nervous," the truck driver admitted, "but ready." The lawsuit laid out in clear terms what had happened that July day and the consequences that followed. It named the city of Circleville, the police department, former Officer Speakman, and several other officials as defendants. It sought damages for excessive force, violation of civil rights, physical and emotional trauma, and medical expenses. But it also sought something beyond money: policy changes, enhanced training, accountability measures, things that might prevent someone else from experiencing what he had. "The evidence is overwhelming," one of the junior attorneys said, pointing to a stack of documents on the table. "Multiple camera angles, clear audio of the trooper warning not to release the dog, medical reports documenting the severity of your injuries, expert testimony on proper canine protocols that were violated." His lead attorney nodded. "Plus," Speakman's own words after the incident, "I think it's a justifiable bite, show a disturbing lack of judgment, and possibly indicate a pattern of behavior." The truck driver leafed through the documents, pausing at photos of his injuries taken at the hospital. The wounds had healed into raised pink scars that tracked across his arm like road maps to somewhere he'd never wanted to go. "What about the police union's grievance?" he asked. "Any news on that?" "It's still pending, but our sources tell us it's unlikely to succeed. The evidence is simply too clear." After reviewing every detail of the lawsuit, the truck driver signed the necessary papers. His hand trembled slightly as he wrote his name, not from fear but from the weight of the moment. This was about more than just him now. As he left the office, his phone buzzed with a text from his mother. "News vans outside the house again. Better come to mine instead." The media attention had ebbed and flowed over the weeks since the incident. It would surge again now that they were filing the lawsuit. Sometimes it felt like living in a fishbowl, with strangers peering in at his pain, some sympathetic, others critical. Comment sections on news articles were battlegrounds where people who had never met him debated whether his fear had been justified, whether he should have just pulled over immediately, whether the officer's termination was fair. At his mother's house, they watched the evening news together. As expected, the filing of the lawsuit was the top local story, with national outlets picking it up as well. The truck driver watched footage of his attorney speaking on the courthouse steps, explaining the legal action while he remained out of the spotlight. "This case is about accountability," his attorney told the cameras. "It's about ensuring that law enforcement officers who abuse their power and violate the rights of citizens face consequences. It's about changing systems that allow such abuses to happen. And most importantly, it's about justice for a young man who did nothing to deserve being attacked by a police dog while surrendering with his hands in the air." His mother squeezed his hand as they watched. She'd been his rock through all of this, managing reporters, screening his calls, making sure he ate when trauma killed his appetite, sitting up with him through nights when nightmares kept him awake. "I'm proud of you," she said quietly. "Standing up like this isn't easy." 3 days after filing the lawsuit, the truck driver received a call from his attorney. The city wanted to meet. Not quite settlement talks yet, but an initial discussion. They're feeling the pressure. the attorney explained. The public relations situation is bad for them, and the legal situation is worse. They know they're going to lose if this goes to trial. The meeting was set for the following week. In the meantime, something unexpected happened. The State Review Board that had been examining the incident issued its findings. The report was damning, detailing multiple policy violations and training deficiencies. It recommended sweeping changes to K-9 protocols across the state. When the day of the meeting arrived, the truck driver felt a strange calm as he walked into City Hall alongside his legal team. They were shown to a conference room where the city attorney, the police chief, and several council members waited. Notably absent was the mayor, who had been distancing himself from the case in recent public statements. The discussion was tense but civil. The city attorney acknowledged the unfortunate incident, but avoided admitting direct liability. He emphasized Speakman's termination as evidence that the city had taken appropriate action. The truck driver's attorney was having none of it. My client was attacked by a police dog while surrendering with his hands in the air, he said firmly. This wasn't an unfortunate incident. It was a violent assault by a police officer who has now been fired for his actions. And the evidence suggests a pattern of problems in your department that enabled this to happen. By the end of the meeting, it was clear the city wanted to settle, though they hadn't yet put numbers on the table. As they were leaving, the police chief asked to speak with the truck driver privately. After conferring with his attorney, he agreed. "I want to apologize personally," the chief said once they were alone. "What happened to you?" "It wasn't right. And it happened under my watch, with an officer from my department." The truck driver studied the older man's face, looking for sincerity. "Do you really mean that, or are you just worried about the lawsuit?" The chief sighed. "Both, if I'm being honest. But mostly I've spent 30 years in law enforcement trying to protect people. When something like this happens, it damages the trust we need to do our jobs. I've been reviewing all our training procedures, all our use of force policies. Changes are coming, real ones." The truck driver nodded, appreciating the candor if nothing else. As winter approached, negotiations with the city intensified. The police union's grievance on Speakman's behalf had been denied, closing that chapter. Now it was about reaching a settlement that acknowledged the harm done and committed to meaningful changes. Through it all, the truck driver continued his physical therapy, working to regain full use of his arm. The therapist, a kind woman with strong hands and infinite patience, pushed him to his limits each session. "You're making great progress," she told him one day as he completed a series of grip exercises that would have been impossible a month earlier. "How's the pain level?" "Better," he said. "Still there, but better." The same could be said for his emotional healing. The nightmares came less frequently now. He could see a police car without his heart racing. The therapy sessions for his mind, like those for his body, were gradually rebuilding what had been broken. In late November, his attorney called with news. The city had made a formal settlement offer. It included substantial financial compensation for his injuries, pain and suffering, lost wages, and future medical needs. But more importantly, it included commitments to policy changes, revamped K-9 protocols, enhanced de-escalation training, stronger oversight of use of force incidents, and regular public reporting on these issues. "It's a good offer," his attorney said. "Better than most cities would make. And it means you won't have to go through a lengthy trial, reliving the trauma over and over." The truck driver took a day to think about it, discussing it with his family and his therapist. In the end, the decision felt right. The settlement wouldn't erase what had happened, but it acknowledged the wrong and took concrete steps to prevent similar incidents in the future. When he signed the settlement papers, he felt a weight lift, not completely but noticeably. It wasn't the end of his journey, but it was an important milestone. That evening, a light snow began to fall as he sat on his mother's porch, watching the flakes drift down in the glow of the streetlights. His phone buzzed with a message from the state trooper who had tried to stop the dog attack, who had kept in touch through the months since. "Just heard about the settlement. Good outcome. How are you feeling about it?" The truck driver typed back, "Like it's a beginning, not an end." As he looked out at the snow transforming the world into something clean and new, he reflected on how much had changed in the months since that hot July day. His body was healing. His spirit was resilient, and he had found a voice he didn't know he had, a voice that could speak truth to power, that could turn personal pain into public good. The police dog had left scars that would never completely fade. But from those scars had grown something unexpected, a sense of purpose. In the coming months, he would begin speaking to community groups about police reform, sharing his story to put a human face on policy debates that too often forgot the real people affected by them. His lawsuit had already prompted changes beyond Circleville. Police departments in neighboring counties were reviewing their K-9 policies. State legislators were discussing new training requirements. Civil rights organizations were using his case as an example in their advocacy work. It wasn't the path he would have chosen. No one would choose pain as their teacher, trauma as their guide. But having been forced onto this road, he was determined to walk it with dignity, to use his experience to light the way for others, to ensure that his suffering served some greater purpose. As the snow continued to fall, covering the world in a gentle blanket of white, the truck driver made a silent promise to himself and to everyone who might find themselves in a similar situation. This story would not end here. This was just another beginning. Spring came, bringing with it new beginnings. The truck driver stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd gathered in the community center. 6 months had passed since the settlement, nearly a year since the incident that had changed his life forever. The scars on his arm had faded from angry red to a softer pink, though they would always be there. A permanent reminder etched into his skin. "I never planned to be standing here today," he began, his voice steady despite the flutter of nerves in his stomach. "I was just a guy doing my job, driving my route like I'd done hundreds of times before. Then one day, everything changed." The audience listened in rapt silence as he shared his story. The traffic stop, the fear, the dog attack, the long road to physical and emotional recovery. He didn't dramatize. He didn't need to. The truth was powerful enough. "What happened to me wasn't unique," he continued. "That's the part that keeps me up at night sometimes. How many others have experienced something similar, but didn't have body camera footage to back up their story? How many didn't have the resources or support to fight for justice? How many cases never made headlines?" This was his third speaking engagement of the month. What had begun as a single invitation from a local civil rights organization had expanded into something larger. People wanted to hear from him. Community groups, church congregations, college classes studying criminal justice. His perspective as someone who had lived through police misconduct and fought for accountability was valuable in a way he'd never anticipated. After his talk, a young black teenager approached him, eyes wide with a mix of admiration and uncertainty. "Do you think things are really going to change?" the boy asked. "Like for real this time?" The truck driver considered the question carefully. False hope was not a gift he wanted to give. "Change is happening," he said finally. "I've seen it. The settlement in my case didn't just bring money. It brought policy changes that are already being implemented. But it's slow and it's not enough yet. That's why we have to keep pushing, keep speaking up, keep demanding better." The boy nodded, seeming to appreciate the honesty. Later that week, the truck driver met with his attorney over lunch. The restaurant was busy, but they found a quiet corner table where they could talk without being overheard. His attorney had become not just a legal advocate, but a friend and mentor through the long months of healing and fighting for justice. "I've got some updates," the attorney said after they'd ordered. "The state legislature is moving forward with the police reform bill. Your testimony at the committee hearing made a difference. Several lawmakers mentioned it specifically when explaining their support." The truck driver nodded, feeling a complex mix of emotions. It was good that his pain had led to something positive, but he couldn't help wishing it hadn't been necessary at all. "And what about Speakman?" he asked. "Any update on whether he's been hired elsewhere?" This was a concern that had troubled him in recent months. The knowledge that officers fired for misconduct often simply moved to another department in another town, where their history might not follow them. "So far, no," the attorney said. "The publicity around the case has made that difficult. And the state certification board is reviewing whether to revoke his law enforcement credentials permanently. That decision should come next month." They discussed other developments, neighboring cities that had implemented new K-9 policies similar to those in the settlement, a police academy that had invited the truck driver to speak to new recruits about the impact of police actions on civilians, a documentary filmmaker who wanted to include his story in a project about police accountability. After lunch, the truck driver drove to the physical therapy center for his weekly appointment. His arm had recovered much of its strength and mobility, though certain movements still caused pain and cold weather made the scars ache. The therapist had become another ally on his journey, pushing him to reclaim what had been taken from him that day on the highway. "How's the grip strength coming along?" she asked as he worked through his exercises. "Better," he said. "I drove all the way to Columbus and back yesterday without my hand cramping up." She smiled. "That's great progress. You've been working hard." "Had to," he replied. "I'm thinking about getting back in the truck. Not long hauls yet, but local routes maybe." It had taken months to reach this point, months of wrestling with fear and trauma, of questioning whether he could ever feel safe behind the wheel of a commercial vehicle again, knowing that any flashing lights in his mirror might trigger memories of that day. But gradually, with the help of his therapist and support group, he'd begun to reclaim this part of his identity too. That evening, he received an email that made his breath catch. It was from a woman in Arizona whose brother had been attacked by a police dog under similar circumstances. Unarmed, not resisting. Unlike his case, there had been no body camera footage, no state trooper to witness and speak up, no media attention. Her brother's claims had been dismissed, his injuries blamed on resisting arrest. "When I saw your story on the news," she wrote, "I finally felt like someone might believe what happened to my brother. Would you be willing to speak with us about how you fought for justice?" The truck driver sat with the email open on his screen for a long time. There were days when he wished he could leave it all behind. The interviews, the speaking engagements, the constant retelling of the worst day of his life. Days when he just wanted to be anonymous again, just a guy doing his job, living his life in relative obscurity. But then messages like this would arrive, reminding him that his voice mattered in ways he couldn't always see. His story had created a small crack in a system that often seemed impenetrable, and through that crack light was beginning to shine. He wrote back, offering to talk with her and her brother, to share what he'd learned about building a case, about healing, about finding strength in the aftermath of trauma. The next morning brought news that the police union had dropped its final appeal of Speakman's termination. The former officer's attempt to get his job back had definitively failed. It was a small victory, but a significant one. Accountability had prevailed over the usual protections that often shielded officers from consequences. The truck driver shared the news with his mother over breakfast. She had been his constant support through everything, fierce in her protection, unwavering in her belief that justice would eventually come. "So, it's really over then?" she asked, pouring him another cup of coffee. "This part of it," he said. "But there's still more work to do." Later that day, he visited the state trooper who had tried to prevent the dog attack, who had testified truthfully about what he'd witnessed, who had gone against the unwritten code of silence that often prevailed among law enforcement. They had maintained a cautious friendship in the months since the incident. Two men from different worlds united by a commitment to what was right. "I heard about the union dropping the appeal," the trooper said as they walked through a park, away from curious eyes and ears. "That's good news." "It is," the truck driver agreed. "But I keep thinking about all the cases where there isn't a trooper like you around to witness what happens, to tell the truth about it afterward." The trooper nodded, understanding the weight of those words. "That's why I've been pushing for more accountability within the system. More cameras, more oversight, more consequences for misconduct. It's not popular with everyone in uniform, but it's necessary." As summer approached, marking the one-year anniversary of the incident, the truck driver found himself back behind the wheel of a semi for the first time since that day. It was just a local route, delivering goods to stores within a 100-mile radius of home, allowing him to return to his own bed each night. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted the mirrors, checked the gauges, and pulled out of the lot. Each mile that passed without incident helped rebuild his confidence. Each successful delivery reminded him of the competence and pride he'd once taken for granted. By the end of the week, the trembling in his hands had stopped. By the end of the month, he was considering longer routes again. On the exact anniversary of the attack, he chose not to hide away or dwell in painful memories. Instead, he agreed to speak at a community forum on police reform, sharing the stage with legal experts, activists, and 2 police officers committed to changing the culture within their departments. "A year ago today, I was attacked by a police dog while standing with my hands in the air. he began, looking out at the diverse crowd. I could have died that day. I could have been left permanently disabled. I could have remained silent afterward, taking a settlement and trying to forget what happened. He paused, feeling the weight of the past year, the pain and the purpose that had emerged from it. Instead, I'm here, speaking to you not just as a victim of police misconduct, but as an advocate for change. What happened to me was wrong. But what's come after, the accountability, the policy changes, the conversations like this one, those things are right. And they're just the beginning. After the forum, as he walked to his car under a sky filled with stars, he reflected on the journey of the past year. His life had been forever altered by those moments on the highway. The physical scars would always remain, and certain sounds or sights could still trigger flashes of fear and memory. But something else had emerged from the trauma, a voice he hadn't known he possessed, a purpose he hadn't chosen but had embraced nonetheless. He had become more than what had happened to him. He had become someone who helped make sure it wouldn't happen to others. As he drove home through the quiet streets, he thought about all that had changed and all that still needed changing. The settlement money had provided financial security, allowing him to take time for healing and advocacy work. The policy reforms were being implemented, though their full impact remained to be seen. The officer who had released the dog was no longer in uniform, no longer able to harm others in the same way. It wasn't perfect justice. Nothing could erase what had happened or heal all the wounds it had caused. But it was something. It was a beginning. And as he pulled into his driveway and looked up at the night sky, he made a silent promise to continue the work, speaking truth, demanding accountability, using his voice for those who might otherwise go unheard. The path ahead would not be easy. Change never was. But he would walk it anyway, one step at a time, carrying with him the hope that someday, no one else would have to endure what he had. That hope, more than anything else, had become his guiding light, the unexpected gift that had emerged from the darkness of that terrible day.